Speech by the Duchess of Athol. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Speech given to the House of Commons on February 22, 1933, by the Duchess of Athol. The Postmaster General congratulated himself upon having refuted the accusation of political bias because he was being attacked from both sides. He was taking it too easily, because, as I understand it, the criticism that comes from the front opposition bench is in regard to talks in which a whole political party is represented, but the complaint from the right honourable gentleman's own supporters is more in regard to other talks of the kind referred to by the honourable member for the Scottish Universities, Mr. Buchan. He was apparently quite ready to accept that in these there should be a left bias. I do not agree with my honourable friend. While with him I have no wish whatever to see controversy avoided in British Broadcasting Corporation talks, I think there is undeniable evidence that, in regard to some of those talks or series of talks, both sides are not being presented. In some cases the side which has not been represented is something much more than the minority point of view referred to by the right honourable member for Epping, Mr. Churchill. An instance in point has been brought forward by Mr. J.O.P. Bland, who, in a recent book of his, has some very strong criticisms on the British Broadcasting Corporation, saying that all British Broadcasting Corporation talks on China gave one point of view, upholding the Nanking government, and making no reference to the terrible atrocities which communist armies have committed in China. For some months past, or even for a year or two, I have been of opinion that the treatment of conditions in Russia is very one-sided. It is now 3 or 4 years since the professors of Russian in our various universities approached the British Broadcasting Corporation on this subject, saying that the talks that were given were too political in their nature, and asking that some of them should give a more real idea of conditions in Russia. In the summer of 1931 there was a series of talks in which those who criticized the regime in Russia were allowed some hearing, though more hearing was given to those who praised it. In view of the criticism of the professors of Russian, it is very strange that the reviewing of this series of talks was given to an assistant of one of these professors who had given one of these talks. The assistant was an admitted communist, and in very bad taste was very discourteous about his chief. It was a very unwise selection both in itself and, as it proved, especially in view of the warning which had been given by the professors of Russian that the British Broadcasting Corporation were not being sufficiently careful. Then, as recently as last autumn, Mrs. Sidney Webb gave a broadcast talk on Russia, which was very uncontroversial and restrained in tone, but had 1 or 2 very important omissions which made it very incomplete. It purported to be a picture of Soviet democracy, and much emphasis was laid on the wide franchise in Russia. Nothing was said about the facts that after the Revolution all election by ballot had been wiped out after having existed for years, and that there was no free election as lists of candidates were sent down. The mere mention of those facts, if they had been brought out, would have shown how inappropriate was the word democracy. She also spoke of the federal government of Russia being supreme in all national affairs, but omitted to mention that the Communist Party controlled the Soviet government. I submit that if the matter were to be fairly presented, the broadcast should have been followed by another, which would have rectified some of these omissions, and thereby have enabled a more complete picture to be presented. In another more recent series of talks by Professor Toynbee on Russia, he states that the anti-God campaign is being given up, but admits that he had not been in Russia since 1930, and he seems to have failed to realize how much this campaign has progressed since then. The official organ of the movement on January 7th specifically foreshadowed redoubled activity in the anti-God campaign during the second 5-year plan. Therefore I say these talks by Professor Toynbee are extremely misleading on a point of interest to people in this country, and to whoever values religion, and this series of talks should be followed by others which could correct any inaccurate impression that might have been made. It seems to me that in this matter the British Broadcasting Corporation seem afraid of Russia. Let us recognize that what is taking place there is one of the most controversial subjects that can be touched upon, and do not let us be afraid to have it treated from both sides. We look to the Broadcasting Corporation to give us, above all things, facts. We are never afraid to give our people facts, and let not the corporation be afraid to give them facts. Only in that way can they avoid misleading many thousands of people. We have to remember that when speeches are made at political meetings, there are interruptions and questions at the end, but anything that comes over the wireless is lapped up in a receptive spirit, and it may be very difficult for people to have the knowledge with which to discuss the questions broadcast. I agree with my honourable friend the member for the Scottish Universities in the fear that our people should have the broadcast mind. That is the mind which freely receives and takes in what it hears without question. The exercise of mental franchise is one of the dearest of life's treasures, and unless people hear every point of view, we cannot be sure that it will be retained by our people. End of speech. Recording by Rhonda Fetterman.